when we use the word Victorian, it has certain definite overtones. A kind of repressiveness, hypocrisy, religiosity, authoritarianism. Okay. I mentioned last time that a lot of the rebelliousness that appeared among the new industrial working classes in the 18th century had a religious form. Methodism, which is either innocuous or right-wing in our culture, when it got started in England, had a definite left-wing, pronouncedly working-class tinge. The workers most often, phrased their opposition to what was being done to them in religious terms, in Christian terms, rather than in secular terms. Remember that the word socialism, remember that the terms left and right only emerged with the French Revolution. The word socialism began to exist at the beginning of the 19th century, but in the form that we call utopian socialism. It did not think in terms of the industrial workers. It was not the rebelliousness of the proletariat was not secular. Its ideology was not secular. Okay. 1819, the Peterloo Massacre, a field outside London called Peterloo is an ironic reference to the Battle of Waterloo 4 years before that defeated Napoleon, massacred hundreds and hundreds of demonstrating workers. So there was a real threat. There was real violence, real antipathy on the part of the new industrial working classes. Okay. What happened? The reign that preceded Victoria, who came to the throne in 1837 at the age of 18, the reign that preceded hers, the Regency, was, if anything, more licentious, more completely. The nobles were the circle around the topmost ruling class was even more out of control than the reign of Charles II, or James II. Okay. Easiest way to describe what happened with Victorianism was that there was a very subtle compromise, ideological compromise. The upper classes tacitly said to the lower classes, all right, we're going to pretend to be religious. We're going to pretend to be moral. We're going to pretend to be stiff-necked and responsible. And in return, you obey. Here's, to give you an idea of what was involved here. In the Middle Ages, there was a thing called the jus primae noctis, the right of the first night. Feudal domains in the Middle Ages were agricultural, so you want people, serfs, to be born as predictably, as regularly as foals or calves. So, therefore, weddings should be in spring. Weddings should be in spring. Okay. And then women are out of the workforce, childbearing, etc. And then after a couple of years, there's this whole new crop of serfs ready to go. Okay, some feudal lords ascribe to themselves the jus primae noctis, the right of the first night. The church required that a bride, even a peasant bride, be a virgin, and you certainly can't rely on peasants or peasant husbands to decide whether they're virgins or not. So who has, priests can't do it, monks can't do it, so who can do it? The local feudal lord. You're following me? All right. Some factory owners of the new factories reportedly said that they were in the position of feudal lords. They had inherited the position in English society that the great nobles had previously had, that the great feudal landlords had previously had, so they should have the jus primae noctis over their female operatives or mechanics or employees. Now, I don't know if this was true, but many people in the working class believed it. And that gives you an idea of the antipathy that was going around. And it should give you a glimpse into the psychological underpinnings of the Victorian compromise. Okay. I told you last week that England during the period of the French Revolution and the wars against Napoleon, constantly at war, extremely repressive, police spies everywhere. It would be very easy to be hung for treason or at least sent off to the new penal colonies in Australia, if you were lucky. Something to remember about the second generation of Romantics, Keats and Shelley, Byron, was that they were born, they came to maturity after the French Revolution had been defeated. After it had been defeated. They were politically and culturally, ideologically very radical. But their radicalism was not in connection with an ongoing movement. Shelley in Adonais, which I hope you read, describes himself as the last fly of a scattered swarm. Think of that. You have all these flies, revolutionaries, and he sees himself as the last fly of the swarm. All the others have been swatted. I also said last week that the second generation of Romantics, in distinction to the first, Wordsworth and Coleridge and Southey, they were not churchgoers. They regarded religion as just another aspect of the ancien régime, the old regime, the political system, hierarchical, undemocratic, that they rebelled against.
Sorry about
That's all right. That's all right.
Stay down.
So the backlog of this set of intellectual circumstances also had a great deal to do with why the Victorians were Victorian. England emerges from the Napoleonic Wars victorious. It has lost its American colonies, tries to get them back in 1812. That doesn't work, but it has established a world empire. And it is beginning to think of itself in terms of empire. It is fulfilling what was implied by the previous era calling itself Augustan. Augustus, remember, was the first emperor of Rome. And you don't have, by the time Victoria comes to the throne in 1837, you don't yet have an organized, coherent working class movement. So, to put it very crudely, very simplistically, how can you be a romantic? You know that saying of Margaret Thatcher's, there is no alternative? Who have ever heard that? Tina, T-I-N-A. When she came to power, talking about capitalism, aggressive entrepreneurial neoliberal capitalism, she said to England, she said, there is no alternative. The Soviet Union is gone, communism is gone, socialism has been discredited. Okay, what intellectuals felt at the beginning of the Victorian era was there is no alternative. In one of his last poems, Wordsworth wrote, and he was a terrible poet at the end, he said, two good lines, he said, our mortal life is crowned in darkness like London in its own black wreath.
Wow.
What is he referring to? Coal dust.
Mm.
What we call smog. They didn't have the word yet. It's such an American word, isn't it? I mean, it's the sort of thing we Americans do, smog. But they just called it fog. The pea super, it was known as. Utterly toxic, as were the vapors from the unprocessed sewage that floated down the Thames.